The first thing I'm going to talk about is why contributing to open source software is so important, and I think that there are a lot of angles we can take to approaching why that contribution is really important. So hopefully one of those will inspire you to contribute. We're also going to talk about different ways of contributing, and that is to say there are a number of skills that open source projects need, and hopefully you have some or at least one of those skills that you can use to contribute. So open source software is much more than just code, and we're going to be going over a number of other like writing skills and usability skills that open source projects need. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to find the right project for you to start contributing to, and then do like a 10-minute introduction to Git and GitHub. So let's get started. All right, Tracy already introduced me, but my name is Lucy Wyman. I do quality assurance for the company formerly known as Puppet Labs. It's now called Puppet, whatever. And I like to think of myself as a lead taxor, much like this man. He's hacking things at the Best Buy. All right, so the first thing I want to do is define some terms, because words mean different things to different people, and I think especially the term open source has a lot of layers to it. So I want to talk about what I mean in the context of this talk when I say open source. So most broadly, open source software is software where the code is publicly available for looking at. But I think in my own personal definition of open source software also includes being able to be contributed to. So it's not read-only, it's read-write. And that means not only that I can am physically capable of putting up a PR on a pull request on GitHub to a project, but it also means that it's actively maintained and open to contribution. There are a lot of open source projects where this isn't necessarily the case, where it's been not maintained for several years in favor of another technology, or where they're not necessarily open about their design and development, et cetera. And so when I talk about open source today, I want to focus on things that have at least these three criteria kind of met. Publicly available, able to be contributed to, actively maintained. You also might hear the term free software a lot today. In many years of research, I'm still not entirely clear on what the difference between free software and open source software is. But again, in the context of this talk, think of them as being essentially the same thing with different motivations. So free software adheres to all of these same criteria. It just comes from a different ideology. If you want a quick read, there's a great little article called What Free Software Means to Me by Matthew Garrett. I should also mention, before we go too much further, that these slides are available at slides.lucywyman.me, as well as I think on the OSCON slides thing. So all the links are actually clickable and stuff. Yeah, cool. So why should you contribute to open source software? Hopefully, being in this room, you're already interested in contributing to open source and have your own motivations for doing so. But I wanted to go over, again, a couple of different angles that we can take to approach the many important reasons why contributing to open source software is super important. So being an engineer, the first reason I want to throw out there is a practical one, and that is don't reinvent the wheel. So we heard in the keynotes this morning a lot of talk about duplication of efforts, and open source can help mitigate that. Yeah, if I need to build my own super special operating system, then I can either do that from the ground up, spend 6 months of developer time and a lot of money building my own special snowflake, or I can just use the Linux kernel and spend much less time forking that and then making any modifications to it that I need in order to create the system, the special system that I have or that I need. Yeah, so not reinventing the wheel is I think a very high priority reason for contributing to open source software. A more maybe touchy-feely one is giving back to projects that you use and love. So if you're a Django developer and have built your career on this great open source tool, then what better way is there to pay it forward than to give back to that project in the form of either code or documentation or whatever skills you have, that project can use, and then future generations can have an even better tool to build their careers on, just like you did. And I think that this is an especially compelling reason to contribute to open source software, because when you contribute to something that you use and love, you are personally invested in that project, and you know the impact that that project can have. And I think that that is, that makes it more meaningful for us as software developers when we have that personal investment in a project, and feel like we're really doing something meaningful with our time, as opposed to just saying like, I'm doing this, or I'm contributing to this tool because I don't want my company to have to reinvent the wheel or whatever. That can sometimes feel, I think, a little soulless almost. So again, giving back to a project you use and love is a great reason to contribute to open source software. Encouraging collaboration and innovation. I know that oftentimes as software developers, we get siloed, right? We exist in these little bubbles where we just work with the team that we work with at work, and that's usually the same geolocation, the same people that we've been interacting with for years now. And so being part of the open source community opens you up to a broader and more diverse range of people to interact with, and encourages you to collaborate and innovate on a project together with people that you might not have worked with otherwise. It can also bring new ideas into a project that you might not have thought of. So if you have a little command line tool and someone is like, hey, it'd be really great if there was this flag added to it. You're like, I would have never thought to add that flag, but that's a great idea. As an example. And another kind of practical and maybe more personal reason that you might want to contribute to open source software is to improve a skill. So if you are looking to learn Rust, what better way is there to learn Rust than start contributing to a Rust project and be able to interact with Rust developers, be able to see the structure of a Rust project, be able to see some example code. All of those are really excellent. Oh my goodness. I don't know what that's from. So there are a lot of compelling reasons to contribute to open source. Again, hopefully at least one of these resonates with you. And yeah, but there's probably a reason that you haven't maybe contributed yet. Among those might be, I'm not a good enough programmer to contribute. I don't know the project well enough. I don't write code, so I have nothing to contribute. You are just a student or a manager or a llama, so you don't have anything to contribute. Contributing to open source is hard, and contributing to open source doesn't benefit me at all. So kind of working from the bottom up here, hopefully we've already addressed that contributing to open source benefits you personally and also benefits the larger technology community by having generalized tools that everyone can use and helping newer people develop skills, etc. I'm also not going to say that contributing to open source isn't hard, but I will say that it doesn't have to be hard, and it often isn't. But I don't want to promise that it won't be. I will say that no matter who you are or what species you are, you most certainly have something that can be contributed to open source. Yeah. That's really what the next kind of section of this talk is about, is, again, those skills that hopefully everyone in this room already has that open source projects can use. So the thesis of this talk is really to dispel the myth that open source projects are just code. Open source projects need much more than code to be successful. And so in the next section, we'll talk about there are a lot more ways to contribute than you might expect, and a lot more things that open source projects need. So the first one is based on our roles as users of software. And I want to say that I think that as users of software, that is our most important role in the software ecosystem. Software does not exist without users, without people who use that software. AI has not become that great yet. And so as users, we can file bugs. And this is not just true of open source software. This is true of all software. But oftentimes as software developers, we create what we think our customers or users want and then just kind of throw it out into the void and hope that someone finds it useful. And as developers, it's super helpful when we get feedback on what we've created and have that perspective on how can we make this better, how can we make it so that it is what our users expect. And I also want to say that the definition of a bug is not just something that is like clearly wrong with software. It can even be something like, I expected XYZ to happen, but instead ABC happened. Or this would be a lot easier to use if there was a help flag that explained how to use it, kind of thing. So there are a couple different avenues for filing bugs, and hopefully whatever project you're interacting with makes it very clear where you can file bugs. And if it doesn't, that's a bug. And you should hopefully find someone's email to email them about that. But some projects will have bug trackers. Like I think a lot of Mozilla projects use Bugzilla, so you can make a bug that way. Oftentimes, if a project's on GitHub, making a GitHub issue is a really easy way to get in touch with developers and tell them, hey, I have this improvement, or just want to report a bug. And if those failed, then emailing someone. Hopefully, again, they have some kind of contact information somewhere where you can let someone know that they have an issue and then tell them that they should make it more clear where they can file bugs. So yes, filing bugs is, again, I think one of the biggest ways that we can give back as users of software and help our developers think about like how do we make this the best project possible for the people who are using it, which is the whole reason that we're making software in the first place. So another skill that hopefully everyone in this room has is the ability to write, and more specifically, the ability to write documentation. I think that the trope that developers hate writing documentation isn't always true, but I also think the number of awesome projects on GitHub that don't even have READMEs is a little too high. So again, writing documentation doesn't necessarily have to be contributing to the official documentation or writing huge long blog posts or anything like that. It can be something as simple as just adding a README to a project that you find that doesn't have one. Or if there's no like man page or no help documentation, just saying like, hey, I don't know how to use this, and it would be really helpful if you had some kind of either command I could run or something online that would explain like how does this tool even work. So READMEs are great. If you're a little more technologically inclined, adding comments to code is also a really great way to help make code more readable and usable and make it easier to contribute to that code. So saying like, how does this function work? Like, what is the input and what is the output? You know, what is this class doing, et cetera. I think that this is a really good exercise if you're looking to like learn a new language. So reading code is a tremendous skill, and this can, I think, really help with that. Learning to read, again, like what is this function doing kind of thing. And that is a tremendous way to contribute. Writing a blog post, I think this is one that we often don't think of under the umbrella of contributing to open source, but how many people have had an issue before that they solved from a blog post that they read? Yeah, I know I have like saved hours of time from I'm getting this super weird error and I have no idea where it's coming from, and someone luckily wrote a blog post that was like, it was like 10 sentences, right, of like, here's the error, here's how I solved it. Super simple. But if you're embarking on a new project or seeing a weird error, or even just looking to get started on a project, documenting that process in a blog post can really help people. And lastly is contributing to official documentation. I think this is what we often think of when we think of contributing to documentation, so that's kind of why I put it last, as like the obvious answer. But official documentation isn't always complete. It isn't always up to date. It isn't always like as readable as it could be. It often has spelling and grammar mistakes. All of these things are hopefully relatively easy to fix and can be a great place to start contributing to open source software. Like just running something through a spell checker, you would be surprised at how much that helps people read the documentation. So another really important way that we can give back to the open source community is by answering questions. So this kind of goes along with writing, like maybe along the lines of writing a blog post, but being there, even if you just say, I heard your question and I know who to talk to get an answer. Even if you don't have the answer, like being on the other side of someone's question and saying, like, I hear your frustration can really encourage someone to like stay in the open source community and encourage them to not just give up on the problem that they're having and go do something else. Like, how often have people asked a question and just kind of gotten radio silence because no one quite knows the answer? I know a lot of times on IRC, people will do that, and that's really frustrating, right? You're like, I just want someone to like understand like the frustration I'm going through. So again, there are a lot of different avenues for answering questions. GitHub issues is a really good one. On IRC is another really great place to just like kind of lurk. And I think that another thing that's kind of surprised me about just hanging out on IRC and answering questions is that people will ask a lot of the same question. So if you have the answer to like one question, you will get to use that answer pretty frequently. And also that people really just appreciate a friendly face or a friendly, like, hey, I'm really sorry that this is happening. Let me see what I can do to help you solve it, or even just like talking through the issue kind of thing. And Stack Overflow is another really great avenue for answering questions. And this is one that my significant other does, but this links to r/Linux questions, and like they'll just hang out on there and answer people's Linux questions. All of these are really great places to answer questions. If you have the technical knowledge to answer questions, like huge plus, definitely do that. Like, we've all been at that place where it's like super frustrating to have any kind of issue, technical or not technical. And having someone to answer our questions is always very helpful. But even if you don't have all the answers, still just like being there to say, I hear your frustration, I know who to talk to within this project can be really useful. Another useful thing, again, interacting with the open source community is around education. Like, that's what I'm doing right now. I actually don't contribute that much open source code, but I do a lot of these other things, and one of them is give talks like this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be at OSCON, but it can be a user group meeting or something called a bar camp, which is like a much more casual conference that's scheduled the morning that the conference happens. So anyone can give a talk about anything. And there are a lot of other events, a lot of other meetups, a lot of other just gatherings of technologians. So just talking about a project that you're really interested in is a tremendous way to help that project gain visibility, help them gain contributors, help just foster enthusiasm for that project. You can also represent an open source project at an event. So like I recently went to, it was like a job fair kind of thing almost, and represented Puppet and just like answered people's questions about what Puppet does and if we had jobs and stuff like that. So that was a really great way to get people interested in Puppet as an open source project, to get people excited, et cetera, to spread the gospel of open source everywhere. And then this is a little bit more of a specialized skill, but design can be a tremendous boost to an open source project. Like, how many people can tell me what this logo is from, right? Everyone knows that this is Docker, but it doesn't even have the word Docker on it, right? And so a logo or a design can really unify an open source project, and again, give it that visibility and that like togetherness. That's not the right word. That like unity, yeah, a unified image for the project. So logos are great, but it doesn't just have to be a logo. It can also be helpful diagrams. I think I disabled my like image thing. This links to a cool like Kubernetes description diagram that can really help people understand complex systems. Like that visual can help us know what's going on under the hood, or even a new feature. If you're working in something that has a user interface, having like, here's roughly what I think this web page should look like. And it doesn't have to be made with like Inkscape or whatever. It can be just hand drawn. Like, here's where I think that the menu should go and where the text should go and what this should look like, etc. So design, also a tremendous way to be able to communicate the ideas that you're having and help a project. So we know why we should contribute to open source software. We know a couple of different ways that we can use the skills that we already have to contribute to open source software. Finding a project, I know, can be really difficult. And I know there's no great one-size-fits-all answer to this. Everyone's perfect project is going to be different, and even there isn't a perfect project. But in the next section, I want to talk a little bit about how to fish, and so hopefully give you the tools that you can use to find the right open source project for you. So these are a couple of different ways to find a project. A lot of them will have a ton of resources, like a ton of possible projects to contribute to. So I know that can be a little overwhelming, but this is just an order of perceived helpfulness. One is Explore GitHub. I find this one really useful because it's aware of everything that is on GitHub. And I think that a couple of the other project finders you have to opt into. So Explore GitHub is great if you're just looking for everything that's on GitHub and then filtering that down based on languages or areas of expertise or things you're interested in or beginner friendliness, etc. What Can I Do for Mozilla is a really great one because you know that a Mozilla project is going to adhere to all of those open source criteria. You know it's going to be maintained. You know it's going to be super open source and awesome. All of that. So this is a really great one if you're really not sure where to start. And it has a little, almost like a questionnaire, what languages do you use? What are you interested in? And then it will just pop you into the wiki page for the projects that it thinks that you would be most successful contributing to. So this is really great if you just want a straight answer to, I don't know where to start contributing, what project should I contribute to? That's a really good one. And then that wiki page will have links to current bugs that need fixing and different ways that you can contribute and all of that. So that's a really great resource. 24 pull requests is typically done in December as an advent calendar kind of thing. And so in the month of December, if you sign up, every day you'll get a thing hey, did you make a pull request? Here's some projects that have had a lot of success being contributed to, but all year round it has a list of projects where people have been very successful contributing to those projects who aren't necessarily always part of those projects. So I think this is a really great resource if you're looking for a much more filtered down list of maybe some smaller projects that are really open to beginner contributions because that's kind of what it's geared towards. And then OpenHatch is the granddaddy, I guess, of project finders. So honestly, in my experience, some of the projects on there are a little out of date. I tried contributing to one and it just wasn't maintained. But that will have a bunch of resources for open source projects of any size. And again, filtering by languages and interests and things like that. So all of these are great resources. We're going to jump into the Git tutorial, but again, I will kind of come back to this finding a project and talk a little bit about how do you know if a project is right for you and kind of a litmus test for seeing is this really a project I want to contribute to? So without further ado, let's jump into getting started contributing, so the actual making your first pull request or your first contribution to open source software. So a couple of first steps. The first thing you want to do is make an account on GitHub if you have not already. And then once you find a project to contribute to, make sure that you read any READMEs or contributing documentation that they have. So those will typically be literally files called readme.md and contributing.md, hopefully in the root of the project. And if those don't exist, make an issue, and you've made your first open source contribution. It's that easy. I also kind of want to stop on this slide for a minute and talk a little bit about the difference between Git and GitHub. So GitHub is the website where open source collaboration happens. So that's where you publish your project. That's where we talk about issues with the project. That's where we discuss contributions, and you put up a contribution and it's like, oh, this looks great, or hey, can you make these changes, etc. That all happens on GitHub website. Git is a program that you install on your local machine. It can handle things like version control, which we're not going to talk about, totally other topic. But that's where you will make the changes to the code on your machine. You'll download it from GitHub, make some changes, and Git will manage adding those changes to the repository, keeping a log of all the changes you make, creating a patch, etc. So just two different, GitHub's the website, Git is something you install on your computer. So you will need to install Git on your machine. It's pretty easy. Usually it's like clicking a few buttons or typing a few keystrokes. Yeah, these are all links. And then the first thing you want to do is fork the repository. Click the fork button. I will do a demo of all of this in a little bit so we can see it all in action. But you want to fork the repository. You want to do something called cloning it or downloading it from GitHub, essentially. Make your changes. So this is creating a file called truth.txt that says I love tacos. And then you want to do something called staging and committing. This is I won't say the hardest aspect of Git to grasp, but the idea here is that you have a bunch of changes that you've made to your files, and you want to what's called stage them for commit. So you're saying, here are the files that I'm ready to commit. There might be some other changes I've made that I'm not ready to commit, but these are the ones that I'm ready to say, make these changes in the official repository. So you stage them for commit, which is what that git add does. So that moves them into, you can imagine all my changes are here. I move a couple of them into the staging area. And then when I say git commit, it actually creates a commit object or a snapshot of those changes that I have staged and says okay, I've made a diff based on those changes. So I added that file, so it would just have that file addition in the staging area. That gets added to the commit object. And then again, talking a little bit about version control, I can go back to that commit or use it in various ways. So that's what add and commit is. Git status will just tell me what is in any of those three areas. So what changes I made that are in staging, what's in staging, and then what has already been committed. And then we push all of our commits back up to GitHub and make a pull request. So let's kind of see that a little more live in action. Oh, snap. Time goes so fast, you guys. All right. So this is my significant other's repo. So I'm going to fork it. And what that does, did it do it? All right, there we go. So since I'm part of Puppet, I can, I guess, technically fork it to the Puppet repo, but I'm not going to do that. So I'll fork it to my private one. It's copying it. So this is just making my own personal copy of someone else's repository. This is really great because it gives me my own personal sandbox that I can kind of play in and break things without breaking Puppet's code or whatever. So it's forking. Oftentimes repositories will require that you fork something. So I'm going to copy this link. This is using SSH to, again, kind of download the repository. I have this little GitHub repo. It has some stuff in it. So we're going to do git clone and then copy paste. All right. We're going to go into that repo, see what's there. It actually looks like I don't have a contributing, which I should. So let's add that first. And then we can see we have a new file. So if I run git status, it says this file is currently untracked. So it knows that I've made a change, but this isn't currently staged for commit. And you can see it says right there, like, add the file to include it in what will be committed. But currently nothing is added to commit. So I'm also going to add another file. Oh, I see. OK, so made a file called tacos.txt. It's got some text in it. Same thing will happen if I run git status again. So now both of those are unstaged. If I do git add this guy, git status, now we can see that tacos is staged for commit, but my contributing file is not. So like if I did git commit, OK, so what I'm doing right now is creating a commit that only has that one file, tacos.txt. What this is technically a file that I can add a commit message to. So this is just a little bit, think of it as like almost a tweet about, like a tweet in length about what my commit is doing. This should be relatively descriptive. You want someone who is like working on the project to be able to read it and know pretty much what changes you've made. But you also want it to be relatively short. So this is because I have my GPG keys linked to my GitHub. Don't worry about it. All right. So now if I do git status, it says my branch is ahead of the origin master, so what I have on GitHub, by one commit because I've already made a commit. And we can see git log will show the list of commits, and we can see the one that I just added. But that contributing.md is still untracked. Yeah. So then if I do git push, it will push it up to my repository. Yay. And then if we go here and refresh, there's my file. Cool. So then I can go back to Elijah's repository, go over to pull requests, click new pull request, compare across forks, and voila. There's my file. Everything looks good. You do kind of want to make sure before you actually click create the pull request, like kind of look through it and be like, are these actually the changes I made? Git is tricky. Sometimes unexpected things happen. Just kind of make sure it's all kosher. This is where I can add more, leave a longer comment if it's something. If I'm like explaining what I'm doing or explaining a decision I made is usually where I'll like use this longer comment section. And then click create a pull request. Yeah. So talking a little bit about this contributing.md and the README, I do want to say that these are great places, even as a veteran open source software contributor. Like, these are always the places that I start when I'm contributing. So I'll read both the contributing and the README. And if I see anything that I think can be improved, I'll submit a really small pull request that has like a spelling change, or I think this could be phrased differently, or you forgot to format your markdown correctly, whatever, small change. And then I'll see if the project is open to that change. And that's kind of my litmus test for, is this a project I want to contribute to? Are they open to contribution? Are they easy to work with? Are they respectful, et cetera? So even as like a more experienced open source contributor, I mean, myself and a number of my friends use this as a way to suss out like what open source projects do we actually want to contribute to and like be a community of. Another really great way to find if a project is for you is to hang out with the community a little bit. So if they have an IRC channel, that's a great place to see, like, is this a friendly community that I want to be a part of? Interacting on GitHub issues is also a great way. Kind of all the ways we talked about before, really, are just great small ways to get started with that process. And if they're not open to new people, don't waste your time. Like, if you put up a PR and someone's not instantly like, this is great, here's how I can help this actually get into the code, then, like, don't bother. Like, there are projects who will, like, love your time and really value you, and those are the projects that you should work with. So that's a little, I hope that was helpful. All right. We're almost to the end. Here's a couple of resources for Git tutorials. Some of them are different from others. Choose which one is right for you. Here's some other resources for different ways of contributing to open source. These are ones that I used throughout the presentation. And I think we have like 3 minutes left. Are there any questions? Yeah. Oh, cool.
We're doing like embedded emoji bars but it's like just a fun thing to do if you want to like questions.
Did you say it was called the heap?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, sorry, just to repeat for the video, there's a project called the heap that does a new kind of smallish project every month that makes it really easy for new people to contribute to. So, worth looking at. Yes? Oh, like if you're working on something and your company doesn't want it to be open sourced, is what?
Let's say you make an improvement to an open source product, you do it at work for your employer.
Mm-hmm.
Your employer might not want you sharing that back out.
Oh, I mean, okay, so the question is, if I make a change to an open source project at work, my employer might not necessarily want me to share that back out to the community. I can't think of a great example of when that would happen. Usually the line I give is, if it's helping my work, then it's worth my time to work on, and it's generally saving my employer money if I am using an open source tool as opposed to having to build it from scratch. But I think you're more asking like if the company kind of owns your contributions. And ownership is definitely a tricky business. I don't have a great answer. Sorry. Yeah? Yeah.
You can also have a conversation about whether the change that you've made is actually really a secret sauce and really core to your company's portfolio. Because if it's not, then why not open it up, right?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to come up here to me with more questions. We're just out of time, and I don't want people to be late to the next talk. But definitely feel free to come up and talk to me. So thank you.